We all remember from our history, remember the Alamo. It was a battle cry, and it brought great victory to our troops as we thought about those who stood courageously in that fort and gave their lives. In a similar way, centuries before that, there were 300 Spartans who gave their lives as they were being threatened by Xerxes, who intended to bring the Persian culture, religion, and way of life to the West and impose it upon the Greek city-state. Remember those Spartans, it was said, and it became a battle cry. Xerxes, ultimately, in spite of his vast army and navy, was defeated and sent back home. Now, the question you might ask yourself is, what does such a leader do when they've suffered such a humiliating defeat? Well, according to the book of Esther, who calls Xerxes Ahasuerus, according to the book of Esther, he threw a party, a drinking party. And it lasted 187 days. More than 6 months. Leaders from around his kingdom, 127 provinces were there, and they were all drinking and partying and having a good time, I suppose. They were drowning their humiliation and misery in alcohol. In the midst of this drinking party that lasted more than 6 months, he ordered his queen, Vashti, to come and parade herself, perhaps naked or half naked, in front of his guests. She refused. And he dethroned her and said, I'm going to find me another queen. And so Providence would have it that he found among all the maidens there in Persia a young girl by the name of Esther. And she was made the new queen of his kingdom. And this, we know, was ordered by the decree of God himself. It was an act of clear providence. Now, while that's going on, in the book of Esther, we read about another storyline, if you will. It's running concurrent with the main one. It has to do with conflict between Haman and Mordecai. Mordecai is the cousin of Esther and had raised Esther, actually. They're both court officials, but Haman, of course, outranks Mordecai. Haman demands that Mordecai and everyone else bow before him, and Mordecai, for whatever reason, said, I'm not bowing before you. Haman was so enraged that he would not bow before him and show proper respect or whatever, that he went to the king and he asked permission that on a certain day there might be a mass extermination of the Jewish people. On a certain day, we're going to kill all the Jews around the world. And the king said, sure, whatever. And so signed the decree that all the Jews on that day would die. Now, we know from the law of the Medes and the Persians, it does not alter. So even though he had walked right into that, the king of Persia, not knowing that his queen was herself a Jew, he walked right into that one. He was set up, as it were, but the law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be altered, so something had to be done to counter that, and that counter was that on that particular day, after all was said and done, after Haman wound up being hung on the very gallows he made for Mordecai, that the Jews were allowed to arm themselves. And so they were no longer soft targets, and they were allowed to defend themselves, and they did, and they survived because they were allowed to defend themselves, even though the decree had gone forth. Mordecai, we heard in our reading, is pleading with his cousin Esther. You got to say something. You've got to do something. Well, you didn't just go barging into the king of Persia in that day and age and demand anything or ask anything. It don't matter if you were the queen. You just didn't go into his presence without permission, without being invited. So she knew that just going to ask him anything could cost her life. So she's hesitant, but he sends word back to her if you don't do something, if you don't say something, God's going to deliver his people some way, somehow, but you're going to pay a price for that. And then he added, who knows but that you've come to the throne for such a time as this. I want to talk to you this morning about that time. What time was it? Well, among the many things we could say, it was a time when the leaders of the people were corrupt, selfish individuals, immoral leaders who thought only of themselves and could care less about those they were leading. Reminds us of the book of Proverbs, chapter 29, verse 2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, the people groan. Haman was a wicked, cruel man. Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, was a wicked man, an immoral man. The leaders of the provinces clearly were wicked and immoral leaders. I want to raise this question. What about the leaders of our land today? Maybe I should rephrase that. Based on what Brother Mitchum is reminding us of in our Sunday morning Bible class. We often speak of those who've been elected to public office in Washington as our leaders, i.e., our bosses. The way the founders established this nation originally, we're the bosses, and they serve us. That's how they set it up. You hear no one speak about it that way today. There are leaders in Washington, and our leaders in Washington will do what they please, and our leaders in our states will do what they please. Let me give you an example of that. In case you had your head in the sand and didn't realize this past week, the governor of Virginia had a really bad week, politically speaking. Now, no one, myself included, would ever suggest that it's okay for someone elected to public office to have it said of them or exposed to them that they were engaged in any kind of racism, i.e. pictures in an school book annual depicting a KKK uniform or blackface or whatever. That's deplorable, that's sickening, that's disgusting. The people of Virginia really should have done their homework before they elected this man, in my opinion, but nevertheless, that's what we're hearing today, and he needs to step down from public office. Excuse me, we seem to be forgetting he did something far worse this past week on the radio for everyone to hear. Yes, the governor of Virginia actually advocated this past week pure, unadulterated infanticide. And this is what he said. The baby will be born, we'll resuscitate the baby, set it aside, and we'll have a discussion. In other words, we'll decide whether we're going to let that baby live or die. It's horrible. What kind of evil person would advocate murdering babies for whatever reason? A woman's right, or, please. I'm tired of having our intelligence insulted by saying the murder of babies is somehow a woman's right. That's disgusting to me. But that's what this governor was saying. Why would the governor say such an insane thing? Well, millions of dollars have been given to this governor by Planned Parenthood. Rush Limbaugh says many times, follow the money trail. If something doesn't make any sense, we'll just follow the money. Who's funding these people? Who's padding their pockets? What other explanation makes sense for a doctor, of all things, to suggest we murder babies? Remind me of Paul's words in 1 Timothy 6, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And what he was advocating is pure, unadulterated evil. It's cruelty. And this is the governor of one of our leading states in our nation. These are scary times that we live in. A few years ago, The Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, was speaking on the Senate floor, and he said, we need to build a wall, a physical barrier on our southern border to stop the flow of illegal drugs and sex trafficking, etc., etc. Well, in case you haven't been watching the news lately, Chuck Schumer is saying exactly the opposite today, and is opposing our president, who is presenting a common sense idea. We ought to protect our country the same way you rich politicians protect your own houses. We ought to build a wall to try to stop or at least retard the flow of all this unorthodox and illegal activity from taking place in our country, to protect our citizens. No, there will be no funding for a border wall. It's racist. Well, what happened to this man? And, of course, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a few years ago, said the same thing. Now she's saying no money for a border wall. Why? Interesting, isn't it, when you understand who their friends are? Drug cartel leaders, drug dealers are funding Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Suddenly they're singing a different tune. Do you realize we're living in a very dangerous time when the people that have been elected, I suggest to you the more dangerous element in our society are the voters who keep voting for criminals to lead us. I'm sorry, but there's no other way to say it. This is the world we live in. You say, well, how could people actually go around and suggest we're going to exterminate an entire race of people? Well, tell me how we can have a governor in our country suggest we ought to murder babies because a mother doesn't want it, has decided she doesn't want it. Well, the question of viability comes up. That baby couldn't survive on its own. How many 25-year-old millennials can survive on their own? Can we decide to kill them too? I mean, this is ridiculous. It's evil. It's just evil. And we need to stop being afraid to call it what it is. And I don't care who's saying it. Anyone saying that is evil. And they need to be exposed as being evil. Who knows but that you come to the throne for such a time as this? What kind of time was it? It was a time of strong drink. Chapter 1 of Esther, verse 6. They served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king, in accordance with the law. The drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Over 6 months, they're sitting around drinking and parading half-naked women in front of them. It sounds like what you probably will see if you decide to watch the Super Bowl. I know that a lot of people who will be tuning into the Super Bowl tonight will be watching all those Budweiser commercials. Oh, they're so sweet, touchy-feely with those horses and now using dogs, and oh, it just pulls on the strings of our hearts. They're advertising the sale of alcoholic beverages. No good thing comes from the consumption of alcohol for recreational purposes, period. Isn't it interesting? Back when I was just a young man, our government outlawed commercials on television that advertised cigarettes. I wonder why. We can advertise alcohol all day. Have you noticed how many of our politicians smoke? And have you noticed how many of our politicians drink? Do the math. We live in very sad times. I don't care if they're advertising or not. We need to recognize alcohol for what it is. Over 60% of the American population describes themselves as regular drinkers. That's a super majority of the people of this country call themselves regular drinkers. God said wine is a mocker. Strong drink is raging. And whoever is deceived thereby is not wise. Again, God said in Proverbs 23, he asked, who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine, do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent, sting like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things. Your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you'll be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies on the top of the mast, saying, they struck me, but I was not hurt. They beat me, but I didn't feel it. When shall I wake that I may seek another drink? In addition, alcohol, we are a nation plagued with quote-unquote prescription painkillers. I'm thankful that our president is waging war against the pharmaceutical companies and any doctors that are going to be issuing such prescriptions, handing it out like candy. You know, I've been asking for years now, why are doctors so determined to give out as much prescription meds as they can when it comes to painkillers? Why do they want to push opiates on the mass? Maybe we should follow the money trail and ask what kind of kickbacks doctors are getting from pharmaceutical companies. I'm sorry, somebody got to say it. I mean, we really need to stop and wake up and realize doctors, even though they're nice people, they went to school a long time, they don't always necessarily have your best interest at heart. Just because a doctor writes you a prescription doesn't mean you got to take 60 of whatever he or she is prescribing to you. You probably will get addicted and it will ruin your life. You know how many people are in rehab today because they had surgery and they got hooked on pain med because it's highly addictive? I mean, a lot of people, good people, they weren't out trying to just look for a good time. They were actually hooked because someone wasn't looking out for them. I'm thankful that our president is trying to wage war against such things. It was a time of immodesty and debauchery. The king is ordering his wife to come parade herself before his guests. What kind of man wants his wife to do that? A sicko. But he's ordering his wife to go parade herself before all of these drunken guests of his. The number one industry in America today is pornography. You say, what's happened to our youth? What's happened to this generation? How did they go so far afield? Have you stopped to ask what they're looking at on their smartphones? You know, back when I was a kid, if you were inclined to look at something like that, you had to find somebody whose daddy had such magazines lying around the house, and then you would have to sneak in and hope you didn't get caught and busted for what. Now you just pick up your phone and you've got what? I mean, you've got hardcore garbage, smut. And this is what our kids are inundated with, images. I mean, women are treated like cattle, and I'm saying that from experience. I was out at the Ag Center this last week. They're setting up for a cattle show. And I thought, isn't it interesting how women are treated the same way? They get cattle. They had cows out there, pretty cows. I thought, man, that's some good-looking ribeye there. But they got these cows, and they got women out there combing their hair and washing them down, and they got the gate set up. My inmates did all this. We set all this stuff up so that people can come and say, yeah, I want to buy that breed. I want to breed with that cow. I'm like, we do women the same way. We treat them like cattle. We disrespect our ladies, and our ladies disrespect themselves. I wonder sometime when I go to Walmart and I see a man walking with what I assume is his daughter. I hope it's his daughter. And the shorts she's wearing expose more of her behind than panties would, and they're in public. And I'm guessing Daddy's thinking, oh, how sexy she is. How cute. These men disgust me. I'm the old-fashioned type that they will to put a big pole in the middle of town square and take these daddies and strap them up and beat them publicly for child abuse. Fathers encouraging their daughter to wear basically nothing to the prom or, the school dance or whatever because, oh, they're so pretty and they're so cute. What kind of twisted weirdo does like that with his own daughter? And yet we see it all over the place. This is insane what we're seeing. This is the world that we live in as well. What kind of time was it? Well, it was a time when human life was cheap. I don't like those Jews. Let's kill them all. Okay. You know what's sad? It's true. And that's what makes it even sadder. The most dangerous place for a human being in this country today is the womb of a woman. More human beings die at the hands of their own mothers than in any, nothing even comes close. By the millions, we are slaughtering our babies. And now, you can decide even up to the moment of birth. As you're giving birth, well, I decide I don't want this baby anymore. I'm not going to describe to you what it takes to deliver a third trimester baby through an abortion procedure. It's so gruesome. It's so horrible. It's not even imaginable. I don't think the Nazis were that cruel. And yet, we have doctors routinely doing this because they say it protects a woman's right to choose. I'm sorry, she's choosing at the wrong time. You don't wait until the baby's born or conceived and decide, I think I've changed my mind about that. By the way, one of our good brothers came to me before service this morning, told me something I'm not really surprised about, but rather alarmed about. You know, you don't have to have a prescription anymore for the quote-unquote morning after pill. And he believed, like I did until this morning, that to get the morning after pill, you had to go ask the pharmacist. You had to go to the trouble of asking the pharmacist because it's kind of like, you know, the cold medicine is behind the counter. You can't get it because they make drugs out of it nowadays. But you can't just get it without having it checked out from the pharmacist. So even though it's not a prescription item, you still have to ask the pharmacist, nope. You go to Walmart. And sometimes at Walmart, they've got the stuff that, you know, people typically steal and walk off with, and they got those little things you can't pull off the rack till somebody comes and opens it up for you and you get off the rack. Like he said, these are just open. Morning after pill right there now, walk up, pull off, and just take it to the counter, check it out, and go home. And mom and dad don't have to know. Preacher don't have to know. Elders don't have to know. Nobody has to know, just me and my boyfriend or whoever. Abortion. Don't even have to see a doctor. I don't care if that baby is 6 hours old or 6 months old or 6 years old. Murder is murder. We have no right to take innocent human life. And that's what abortion is. You can call it abortion, and I suppose it makes us feel better to say that. It's murder. Plain and simple. And it's murder of the worst kind. If you've ever seen doctors who have just performed even early second trimester abortions, it's horrific. You will see images that will disturb you the rest of your life. And these guys just glibly do it day after day. Planned Parenthood is pushing this. And yes, our politicians are pushing Planned Parenthood on us. Why? Because Planned Parenthood is paying our politicians. That's why. And we're suffering because, as a nation. God said of Judah that things are going to happen so horrible in his judgment against them that whoever hears about it, his ears would tingle. Why? Because Manasseh had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. They were killing their babies in the name of religion. We kill them today in the name of convenience. Don't want to be bothered with a baby. Or as President Obama said, I don't want my daughters have to suffer with a baby. Can you believe a president of the United States would speak that way? Well, he did. He publicly did. Unashamedly so. So if my daughter gets pregnant, I suppose he'd say, kill it. Chop it into pieces, suck it up in the vacuum cleaner, and be done with it. I mean, this is horrible. And if God's people are not outraged by it, I pray God have mercy on the soul of this nation. We need to be up in arms about what's happening in our country. These innocent, precious souls are being snuffed out by evil people. Yes, it was a time when life was cheap, and yes, I saw someone say on Facebook today, won't be long until a certain political party starts coming after the aged and elderly. Excuse me, they already are. States in our union already allow assisted suicide. New York just recently passed with standing ovation infanticide laws. The same state is now arguing we need to have doctor-assisted suicide in the state of New York. It's happening everywhere. Death is being glorified, embraced. I don't know about you, that's kind of freaking me out. That's crazy. What kind of world is it that says we prefer death over life? I want to die and I want my kid to die. Something is wrong with us. We need to wake up as a nation and ask, what's wrong with us? What happened to us? The book of Esther reminds us that it was a time that needed strong, godly women. I submit to you that if there is any hope of turning this thing around in our own time, it's going to start with our ladies. It always does. Esther's silence would have been sin, but she wasn't silent. She did what she needed to do to save her people. Reminded Paul's words to Titus 2 verse 4, that they admonished the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husband, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Remember the first time Hillary Clinton ran for president? And she made fun, literally made fun of women that stayed home and baked cookies for their children. I got news for her and everyone like her. There is no more honorable job in this world than motherhood. Nothing even comes close. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. You could ask Moses, who influenced you most? That Egyptian maid that got you out of the water, or your mother who nurtured you and taught you? Ask Timothy, who influenced you most in your life? My grandmother and my mother. Ladies, you need to encourage your sons to be preachers and elders and deacons and Bible class teachers. You need to encourage your husband to be involved in the work of the church. You need to encourage your children to be Christians. There's no more powerful influence over a husband than his wife. What sort of time was it? It was a time when God's people needed God's help. We desperately need God's help today. And we need his blessing, and we need his mercy. Without God's intervention, the Jewish people would have been destroyed. Without God, our nation is doomed. Without God, this congregation is doomed. Without God, you are doomed. Isn't it good to note, as Paul did to the Athenians, God is not far from any one of us. It's comforting, it's reassuring to know that if we, by faith, reach out, we can take hold of the saving hand of God, who is anxious to step in and to rescue us from the mess we have created. As we close this lesson, I want to speak to you about this time of invitation, when you have the opportunity to respond, to express your need to obey the gospel, or to be restored to your rightful place among the people of God. This is a time that God has granted you. If those are your needs, I pray that you make those needs known right now while together we stand.